The bright lights of Jimmy Kimmel Live glinted off the polished studio floors, reflecting a world that seemed perfectly controlled, meticulously staged, and utterly prepared for entertainment. On this night, Anne Hathaway was scheduled to appear, a star of the highest caliber, whose presence alone commanded attention. The camera pans across the audience, their excitement palpable, their murmurs swelling as anticipation builds. They are unaware that this particular evening, the air behind the cameras hums with a tension they cannot yet see. Hathaway, poised and graceful, enters the set, her smile perfectly practiced, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of someone used to public scrutiny. But even in this moment of apparent calm, something lingers beneath the surface. A subtle tightening of her jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes' tiny cracks in a flawless exterior that hint at what is to come. Jimmy Kimmel, the host, greets her. Warmly, his voice smooth and familiar, carrying the casual charm that has made him a staple of late-night television. The audience laughs politely at his opening jokes, the kind designed to warm up both guests and viewers. But underneath the banter, an electric undercurrent begins to build. Hathaway responds with her trademark wit, the dialogue flowing with ease. Yet there is a noticeable edge. Observers would later note that her responses, though polite, carry a subtle firmness, an undercurrent of resistance to the joviality she's expected to display. Every word, every smile, seems carefully measured, a performance honed over years, a mask worn to maintain composure in the relentless spotlight of Hollywood. As the interview progresses, Jimmy begins to probe, not with malice, but with the curiosity and cheekiness that define his style. He asks pointed questions about Hathaway's recent projects, her public image, and even about the personal experiences that have shaped her career. At first, Hathaway navigates these waters with grace, a seasoned sailor steering through familiar storms. But then, one question seemingly innocuous, almost playful, strikes a nerve. The camera captures the briefest flicker across her eyes. Surprise, irritation, something deeper that the audience might miss on a first viewing. The tone of the room subtly shifts, though the laughter continues, though the audience remains unaware. There is tension, an invisible line being approached, one that neither the host nor the viewers can yet fully measure. Jimmy leans in, unaware of the storm gathering across from him. His voice remains calm, teasing, but there is a sharpness now, an edge that carries unintended provocation. Hathaway's posture stiffens. The pauses between her answers grow slightly longer, her responses clipped, precise, yet unmistakably firm. The audience senses something is different. They laugh less, readily lean in, trying to catch the nuance of what is unfolding. Behind the cameras, crew members exchange glances. Seasoned staff recognize the signs. Live television has a delicate balance, a rhythm that, when broken, can erupt into chaos. And on this night, the rhythm is about to shatter. The argument ignites. Almost imperceptibly, Jimmy, in his natural curiosity, pushes a little further, probing the tension he doesn't fully perceive. Hathaway, a master of public poise, holds her ground, her voice steady but undeniably sharp. "I think that's a question that's been asked far too many times," she says, a measured response that carries weight beyond the words themselves. The audience chuckles nervously, unsure whether the humor is intentional or defensive. Jimmy, sensing resistance, attempts to lighten the tension with a joke, but it lands awkwardly, the laughter forced. Hathaway's composure begins to crack, a tension line threading through the calm veneer she has maintained so meticulously. In the following moments, the conversation escalates. Words are exchanged more rapidly, the playful rhythm of the interview giving way to a charged verbal sparring match. The camera captures Hathaway's expression in close-up, eyes narrowing, lips pressed together, hands tightening briefly on her lap. Jimmy's smile falters for the first time, replaced by a subtle furrow of the brow, a recognition that the dynamic has shifted irreversibly. The audience, now fully alert, leans forward. Something unprecedented is happening on a stage meant for scripted humor, a raw human confrontation, unfiltered and urgent. The energy in the room is electric, charged with anticipation and disbelief. Then it happens. Hathaway stands abruptly, her movements deliberate, measured, yet impossibly swift in the stillness of the studio. The audience gasps. Jimmy attempts to interject, his voice a mixture of surprise and protest, but Hathaway's momentum cannot be halted. She walks toward the exit, heels clicking sharply against the studio floor, a soundtrack of tension that echoes across every camera angle. Crew members scramble, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment unfold naturally. In her wake, the studio feels suddenly hollow, the laughter replaced by stunned silence. The camera pans across faces frozen in disbelief, capturing reactions, ranging from shock to admiration, confusion to awe. As Hathaway reaches the stage edge, a final line is delivered sharp, concise, and impossible to ignore. "I'm done with this conversation," she says, her voice carrying across the studio in a way that leaves no room for misunderstanding. The words hang in the air, suspended in the collective consciousness of everyone present. Jimmy, momentarily stunned, recovers, trying to regain control. But the impact of her exit has already rippled through the audience and the broadcast itself. The director signals for commercial break, the staff murmuring behind the cameras, yet the reverberations of the moment cannot be contained. Immediately, viewers at home begin to react. Social media erupts with clips of the incident, hashtags trending within minutes. Fans dissect every second of the confrontation, analyzing expressions, tone, and subtext. Some praise Hathaway's courage, her refusal to tolerate what she perceives as disrespect. Others criticize her response, framing it as overreaction or unprofessional. The dichotomy sparks debates that span platforms and time zones, the argument on stage transforming into a global conversation about celebrity, pressure, and public expectation. In the aftermath, the studio sits in stunned quiet. Crew members review monitors, replaying the moment frame by frame, noting subtle gestures and micro-expressions that foreshadowed the storm. The tension that began as a barely perceptible crack in Hathaway's composure is now a seismic shift, one that will dominate headlines for days, if not weeks. Experts will later dissect the dynamics of live television, the psychology of fame, and the delicate balance between personal integrity and public performance. For Hathaway herself, the storm is immediate but controlled. Though the cameras no longer capture her, the energy of the confrontation lingers. Behind the stage, moments of reflection, deep breaths, and recalibration occur, an internal processing of emotions that millions of viewers at home cannot see, yet feel indirectly through the intensity of her departure. The episode becomes more than a late-night interview. It becomes a case study in tension, conflict, and the human limits of composure under public scrutiny. By the time the cameras return, the narrative has shifted. The incident, though brief in real time, has layered complexity, a collision of personality, expectation, and media spectacle. Hathaway's walk-off is no longer simply a reaction. It is a statement, a declaration that live television, no matter how polished, can never fully contain the humanity of those who appear on its stages. The audience, once passive, now participates emotionally, caught between empathy, judgment, and sheer fascination. And as the broadcast continues without her, every frame, every lingering camera angle, every awkward pause reminds viewers that something remarkable just occurred. The story has only begun to unfold. Footage will circulate, commentary will multiply, and public opinion will polarize. In the next chapter, the layers behind this confrontation, the build-up, the pressures, and the industry dynamics will be revealed, showing that Hathaway's decision was not merely an isolated eruption, but the climax of a complex interplay between celebrity, media, and personal boundaries. In the quiet that follows the storm, one truth becomes undeniable. Live television is a stage not only for performance, but for unpredictability. And on this night, Anne Hathaway reminded the world that even the most composed and celebrated figures can reach a breaking point, creating a moment that would be dissected, discussed, and remembered for years to come. Behind the studio doors, away from the bright lights and rolling cameras, the atmosphere of Jimmy Kimmel Live was markedly different. Here, the polished exterior of late-night television gave way to the subtle hum of tension, a backstage world where every movement, every word, carried weight. Crew members moved with practiced precision, but even they felt the subtle shift in energy the moment Anne Hathaway arrived. She had been greeted with smiles and handshakes, cameras flashing, but underneath the professionalism and cordiality, something more intricate was unfolding, a buildup of friction that had been simmering long before this particular evening. Insiders later revealed that Hathaway, though known for her charm and grace in public appearances, had grown weary of the relentless pressure of celebrity interviews. The questions, often phrased to elicit humor or controversy, had begun to feel invasive, repetitive, and, at times, disrespectful. These were not moments of malice on the host's part. Jimmy Kimmel's style relied on teasing his guests, probing for stories, and occasionally testing boundaries. Yet for someone like Hathaway, accustomed to navigating public scrutiny with careful poise, the cumulative weight of these interactions created an undercurrent of irritation that even the most polished smile could not fully conceal. As rehearsals commenced earlier that afternoon, crew members noticed subtle signs. Hathaway's responses were precise, almost clipped, as if each word had been weighed for its potential impact. Her eyes, scanning the set, reflected not just awareness, but a kind of strategic vigilance. It was clear she had anticipated certain questions, preparing responses that would maintain professionalism while signaling her boundaries. Behind the cameras, production assistants whispered among themselves, speculating about whether the interview would proceed smoothly or hit unforeseen turbulence. The tension was almost imperceptible to casual observers. Yet for those immersed in live television, the signs were unmistakable. Guests carefully balancing composure and constraint. The hour leading up to airtime only intensified the anticipation. Makeup artists and stylists worked frantically, finalizing every detail, while assistants briefed Hathaway on the order of segments and potential questions. Yet despite this meticulous preparation, there lingered a sense that something intangible was at play. Perhaps it was the weight of accumulated experiences, the relentless media scrutiny, the prying questions from journalists, the constant expectation to charm and entertain regardless of personal fatigue. Hathaway, though outwardly calm, carried this tension with her, like a coiled spring waiting for a release. As the cameras rolled and the show transitioned to live broadcast, the contrast between the controlled environment of rehearsal and the unpredictability of live television became apparent. In earlier promotional interviews, Hathaway had been charming, witty, and engaged, yet always with a discernible boundary. Tonight, however, the energy was different. Kimmel, unaware of the subtle cues of irritation, approached the conversation with his characteristic casual confidence. The dialogue began smoothly, questions about film roles, anecdotes about production experiences, but beneath the surface, the dynamics of power and control were already in motion. Observers later dissected the nuances of the exchange. The way Hathaway's smiles didn't fully reach her eyes, the slightly delayed responses, the measured pauses that hinted at internal deliberation. Each gesture, each micro-expression, was a window into her thought process, revealing the delicate negotiation between public expectation and personal authenticity. Meanwhile, Jimmy's energy, confident and playful, inadvertently increased the tension. His probing questions, intended as humor, were interpreted differently in the context of Hathaway's accumulated stress. What might have been taken lightly in an ordinary interview became a test of patience and composure. Footage from behind the scenes captured moments that viewers would never see. Brief exchanges with assistants, whispered reminders from producers, and Hathaway's subtle yet deliberate shifts in posture. Every element contributed to the buildup, a silent narrative unfolding in parallel to the public broadcast. The stage was set not only for an interview, but for a collision between human limits and the performative demands of fame. Crew members would later recall the strange stillness, punctuated by small signs of tension, a tightening of the jaw, a fleeting frown, a hand brushing nervously against a prop. These were small details, easily overlooked, yet they foreshadowed the eruption that would soon captivate millions. Even before the live segment began, social media chatter reflected a growing awareness among fans and journalists that something unusual might occur. Predictive posts speculated on Hathaway's demeanor, referencing her previous appearances and the unspoken tension that often accompanies high-profile celebrity interviews. Analysts noted that, unlike scripted performances, live television captures genuine emotional reactions, making each appearance a delicate balancing act. Hathaway, fully aware of this dynamic, approached the interview with a mental framework aimed at maintaining control while asserting boundaries. Yet even the most meticulous planning could not account for the unpredictable energy of a live, unscripted exchange. When the interview commenced, the initial moments suggested nothing out of the ordinary. Hathaway delivered her lines with poise. Kimmel offered his humor and charm. But beneath the banter, a quiet electricity crackled, a collision of intent and perception. Hathaway's carefully constructed boundaries began to meet the spontaneous energy of the host. Each joke, each tease, each casual remark became a potential trigger point, magnified by the heightened stakes of live television. The tension, invisible yet tangible, threaded through every frame, every glance, every pause, and retrospective analysis. Media psychologists noted that Hathaway's reactions were a product of both immediate provocation and cumulative stress. Her years in the spotlight, navigating public expectations and intense scrutiny, had built a reservoir of emotional energy. While many might have dismissed the early signals as minor, seasoned observers understood that the interaction was a powder keg. One well-placed question, one inadvertent challenge, could ignite a response powerful enough to disrupt even the most controlled setting. And so, the stage was perfectly set for a confrontation that was as inevitable as it was unexpected. As the segment progressed, the subtle cues became increasingly pronounced. Hathaway's body language hinted at rising tension. Her shoulders stiffened, her gaze sharpened, and her responses, though polite, grew more deliberate, signaling the boundaries she was unwilling to compromise. Jimmy, still operating under the assumption of playful banter, pushed slightly further, unaware of how his tone intersected with the accumulation of stress and restraint. The interplay of personality, preparation, and performance created a delicate dance, one that balanced precariously between entertainment and confrontation. Crew members watched with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. They understood the fragile balance of live broadcast, how small gestures, micro-expressions, and the unspoken energy of a guest could transform a routine segment into headline-making drama. The tension was no longer subtle. It had entered the space between words, in pauses too long, in smiles that did not reach the eyes. Every frame captured an invisible narrative, an internal struggle, a negotiation of identity and control. Finally, as the conversation neared the point of public escalation, the culmination of backstage tensions, accumulated pressures, and live unpredictability became clear. Hathaway, experienced and measured, reached a threshold, a line beyond which composure could no longer be guaranteed. The audience, still smiling politely, remained largely unaware of the intricate psychological and emotional layers building just out of sight. Yet for those behind the cameras, the signs were unmistakable. The moment of confrontation was approaching, a storm waiting to break across the polished veneer of late-night television. In this quiet, charged prelude, the stage was more than a set, it was a crucible. Anne Hathaway, navigating fame, expectation, and professional demands, was at a tipping point. The audience, a host, a crew, and eventually millions of viewers online would bear witness to the inevitable eruption. What had begun as routine promotion had become the slow ignition of a live human drama, a collision of persona, pressure, and performance, all poised to explode under the unforgiving glare of television lights. The story of that evening, the argument that would captivate the world, had its roots in these backstage moments. Subtle glances, controlled gestures, whispered reminders, and cumulative pressure all combined to create the perfect storm. By understanding this context, viewers gain not only insight into the event itself, but into the complexities of celebrity life, live television, and the fragile balance between composure and authenticity. It was here, behind the cameras, that the tension seated itself, quietly building until the moment it could no longer be contained. And as the cameras rolled, capturing the opening lines of the interview, one truth was undeniable. This was not merely a celebrity appearance. It was a confrontation waiting to happen, an emotional crescendo drawn from months of unseen pressures, rehearsed poise, and the unpredictable chemistry between host and guest. The scene was set, the players positioned, and the audience, both live and virtual, was about to witness a moment that would redefine perceptions, dominate headlines, and spark debates across the globe. The moment the conversation shifted on Jimmy Kimmel Live, it did so almost imperceptibly at first. The audience, still settling into the rhythm of the interview, did not immediately sense the undercurrent growing between host and guest. Jimmy leaned in, his trademark grin in place, his voice light and teasing, asking about Hathaway's recent roles, her experiences on set, and the occasional behind-the-scenes anecdote. At first, her responses were polished, witty, and precise each word measured, each pause intentional. Yet beneath the surface, a tension had begun to thrum, subtle at first, then increasingly undeniable. The room seemed to vibrate with it, the invisible electricity between two strong personalities, poised on the edge of confrontation. It was a question about her latest project, phrased lightly, that acted as the spark. "So, Anne, how do you handle it when critics really get under your skin?" Jimmy asked, leaning forward, playful yet probing. Hathaway's smile flickered. Her eyes, for just a fraction of a second, revealed something deeper than public composure could mask, an almost imperceptible flash of irritation. She responded carefully, words chosen with precision. "Well, I think criticism is part of the job, isn't it? But some questions are more exhausting than enlightening," she said, her voice steady but carrying a subtle edge. The audience laughed politely, sensing the humor, but unaware of the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Jimmy, sensing resistance, attempted to lighten the moment with a joke, one of his familiar quips designed to provoke laughter. "Exhausting, you say? I wouldn't have guessed," he said, smiling broadly, leaning closer as if to coax her into banter. But the effect was the opposite. Hathaway's eyes narrowed slightly, and her smile remained polite but strained. There was a pause, an almost cinematic stillness, as the energy in the room shifted. Crew members behind the cameras exchanged glances, subtle signals passing silently. This was no ordinary exchange. The playful rhythm of late-night humor had transformed into a tense, charged verbal sparring, unpredictable and electric. The argument escalated rapidly after that. Jimmy, continuing in his teasing manner, pressed further, making light of Hathaway's past interviews and public statements. Hathaway, no stranger to media scrutiny, stood her ground. Her voice remained calm but firm, measured yet unwavering. "I think that's a line of questioning that's been addressed countless times before," she replied, her tone carrying authority. The audience reacted with nervous laughter, sensing a crack in the polished veneer, while Jimmy's confident grin faltered just slightly. The tension had become a tangible presence, stretching across the stage like an invisible wire. Tight and ready to snap. Camera angles shifted to capture micro-expressions that would later dominate social media and commentary. Hathaway's subtle frowns, her brief tightening of hands in her lap, the slight set of her shoulders all told the story of a professional at her limit, navigating the high-pressure environment of live television. Jimmy, meanwhile, seemed momentarily unsure, a rare break in his practiced confidence. He continued, still smiling, but the energy had changed. The teasing now carried risk, and the room seemed collectively aware that a critical moment was approaching. Every audience member leaned in, the laughter more cautious, the applause subdued, as if sensing the magnitude of what might come next. In a series of rapid exchanges, the tension became palpable. Hathaway's words, though polite, were precise, each sentence calibrated to assert boundaries without breaking decorum. Jimmy's attempts at humor, however, increasingly collided with her growing exasperation. A casual jab about social media. Reactions drew an almost imperceptible sigh from Hathaway, a micro-expression that spoke volumes. In these moments, the audience saw glimpses of something rare on live television. A genuine, unfiltered human reaction, a window into the pressures and vulnerabilities of a high-profile figure under public scrutiny. The argument's climax approached with cinematic inevitability. Hathaway leaned slightly forward, voice controlled but sharp, eyes meeting Jimmy's with unwavering intensity. "I don't think this conversation is productive anymore," she said, her words deliberate, carrying weight beyond the immediate context. The audience's nervous laughter faded into silence, the energy shifting fully from light-hearted banter to suspenseful confrontation. Crew members behind the cameras braced for what they already sensed would happen next. Every footstep, every gesture, every subtle inflection became part of the building tension, a choreography of human emotion captured in real time. Then, with a suddenness that stunned both audience and crew, Hathaway stood. The movement was deliberate, measured, but carried with it the finality of someone who had reached a threshold. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished studio floor, the sound punctuating the room's collective tension. Jimmy attempted to interject, a startled laugh escaping, but she continued, unwavering. The camera followed her closely, capturing the stunned reactions of crew, audience, and even the host. The energy of the studio shifted, instantly polished entertainment replaced by raw, unscripted emotion. "I'm done with this conversation," Hathaway said, her voice carrying across the stage with clarity and authority. The words, simple, yet powerful, were enough to stop the moment in its tracks. The audience gasped audibly, some frozen in shock, others exchanging glances that conveyed disbelief and curiosity. Jimmy, momentarily speechless, tried to recover with a joke, but the impact of her exit had already taken hold. The director signaled for commercial break, yet the reverberations of the moment extended far beyond the studio walls. Social media erupted immediately, clips circulating rapidly, comments flooding in from millions of viewers, each dissecting the microseconds of tension that led to Hathaway's storm-off. Media analysts and psychologists would later examine these moments in detail, breaking down her expressions, posture, and word choice. Hathaway's reaction was framed not as an emotional outburst, but as a carefully measured assertion of boundaries, a professional navigating the extreme pressures of live media. Observers noted that the combination of public expectation, cumulative, stress, and the immediate provocation of a live, teasing host created a perfect storm. The audience, though witnessing only fragments, felt the drama because the energy of genuine human confrontation cannot be entirely masked. Even on the most polished stage, footage from the live segment quickly became viral. Every gesture, glance, and pause was replayed, analyzed, and shared. Memes emerged, discussions flourished, and debates ignited over social etiquette, celebrity accountability, and the pressures of fame. Social media platforms lit up with opinions, some praising Hathaway's composure under provocation, others critiquing her for leaving the set mid-interview. The incident became a global conversation, a testament to the unpredictable nature of live television and the fragility of human composure under public scrutiny. Behind the scenes, the staff and crew reflected on the intensity of what had just unfolded. For them, it was more than a disruption of the show. It was a live demonstration of the human limits of patience, performance, and professionalism. The contrast between rehearsed perfection and the spontaneity of emotion created a spectacle that no script could fully anticipate. Every frame captured, every micro-expression recorded, would become part of the narrative retold across media outlets, talk shows, and online commentary. By the end of the segment, the stage was transformed. What began as a routine promotional interview had evolved into a study of human behavior under pressure, a collision of personality, expectation, and circumstance that captivated millions. Hathaway's storm-off was not merely an exit. It was a statement, a demonstration of boundaries, resilience, and the complexity of navigating celebrity in an era of instantaneous public scrutiny. The audience, the host, and viewers worldwide were left with a moment frozen in time, a perfect storm of drama, tension, and emotional authenticity. And as the cameras cut to commercial, the story was far from over. Analysis, commentary, and speculation would dominate news cycles for days. The argument itself had become a lens through which to examine fame, power dynamics, and the hidden pressures behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. In that brief, charged segment, Hathaway had reminded the world of one undeniable truth. Live television, no matter how rehearsed or polished, is a stage for the unpredictability of human emotion, and the consequences of crossing certain boundaries can be immediate, powerful, and unforgettable. The moment Anne Hathaway walked off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live, the ripple effect was instantaneous. Cameras caught the polished chaos, the stunned audience, the frozen expressions of crew members, and Jimmy Kimmel himself, attempting to regain control. But beyond the studio walls, the story was already exploding across the digital world. Within seconds, clips from the interview began circulating on social media platforms, each one dissected, analyzed, and shared by millions. Twitter lit up with trending hashtags. Hashtag Anne Hathaway Stormoff. Hashtag Live TV Meltdown. Hashtag Jimmy Kimmel Drama. Instagram. Reels and TikTok videos replayed the moment in slow motion, overlaying dramatic music and commentary, amplifying every nuance of her expressions, gestures, and the sharp click of her heels on the studio floor.